China's quiet pivot from property speculation to metal sovereignty. Section 1, Introduction. The misread pivot. China's property slowdown is widely framed as a failure of policy, of growth management, or of an overheated system finally cracking under its own weight. In Western commentary, it is often treated as a crisis to be fixed, reflated, or reversed. But this reading assumes that China shares the same underlying priorities as property financialized economies elsewhere. That assumption is likely wrong. A more coherent interpretation is that China is not stumbling into a property correction, but walking away from property as the organizing center of its economy. What looks like retrenchment from one angle looks, from another, like a deliberate reallocation of value, attention, and capital. China appears to be demoting real estate from its role as a dominant savings vehicle and elevating something else in its place: metals, particularly precious metals, and the industrial systems that process them. This shift is not cosmetic. It is structural. It reaches into household behavior, national reserves, industrial policy, and foreign partnerships. And it aligns tightly with a deeper strategic reality. In the decades ahead, economic and geopolitical power will be constrained less by finance or software, and more by access to and control over the metals that make modern systems possible. Section 2, The Property Trap: Why Housing Had to be Demoted. Property occupies a uniquely dangerous position in modern economies. It is simultaneously a basic human necessity and a financial asset. When it becomes the primary store of household wealth, that dual role creates distortions that compound over time. History offers repeated warnings. In Japan, the late 1980s property and land bubble embedded real estate so deeply into balance sheets and collateral structures that its collapse crippled credit creation for decades. In the United States, housing-centered leverage and securitization turned a localized asset bubble into a global financial crisis. In Canada and parts of Europe, property inflation has increasingly crowded out productive investment and constrained labor mobility. The underlying mechanism is simple but powerful. When savings, collateral, and social aspiration are concentrated in land, the economy begins to revolve around protecting land values. Capital flows toward construction and speculation rather than productivity. Employment becomes indirectly tied to asset prices. Younger generations are priced out of housing and locked into geographic immobility. The system becomes brittle. China has observed these outcomes closely. Allowing property to remain the dominant savings vehicle would risk locking its economy into the same negative feedback loops: financialization without corresponding gains in productivity or strategic capacity. Reframing housing as a utility for living rather than a speculative asset is therefore not ideological. It is preventative. Section 3, Redirecting Savings: Precious metals as social infrastructure. Demoting property creates a vacuum. Households still need a way to store value over time. If savings are discouraged in real estate, they must be absorbed somewhere else. In China, equities and corporate bonds are imperfect substitutes. Equity markets are volatile and culturally less trusted. Corporate debt is opaque to households and closely intertwined with state policy. By contrast, precious metals, gold and silver, are tangible, culturally legible, and psychologically stable. Encouraging precious metals as savings vehicles accomplishes several objectives simultaneously. It provides households with an alternative store of value that does not inflate land prices. It channels savings into assets that are less likely to destabilize the domestic economy through leverage, and it does so in a form that fits neatly within regulated physical markets that are geographically anchored and administratively legible to the state. In this sense, precious metals function not just as financial instruments, but as social infrastructure for savings, a way of shaping long-term behavior while reducing systemic risk. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Section 4, China's Core Advantage: Mastery of Metallurgical Processing. This shift toward metals is not arbitrary. China is not simply choosing gold and silver because they are traditional or conservative. It is choosing them because they sit atop a domain in which China holds a deep and durable advantage: metallurgical processing, refining, and separation. In the global imagination, resource power is often equated with mining, but mining is only the beginning. The strategic choke point lies in what comes next, the dirty, capital-intensive, regulation-heavy work of turning raw ore into usable material. Over decades, much of the world outsourced this middle layer. China absorbed it. As a result, China has become a specialist in the unglamorous but indispensable processes that transform geology into industrial input. This specialization compounds. Scale begets learning. Learning begets efficiency. Efficiency begets pricing power. And pricing power reinforces scale. Over time, this creates network effects that are difficult to replicate elsewhere. The result is not just industrial capacity, but industrial gravity. Section 5. Hitchhiker metals, the hidden leverage. One of the least appreciated consequences of processing dominance is control over what might be called hitchhiker metals. Many critical elements are not mined in isolation. They emerge as byproducts, embedded within larger streams of copper, zinc, nickel, or gold. When a country controls the processing and refining stage, it does not just refine the primary metal. It captures the byproducts as well. Control one stream, and you implicitly gain leverage over several others. This is where second and third order effects emerge. By specializing in base metal processing, China quietly accumulates optionality over a broad family of derivative materials, some of which are essential for advanced electronics, energy systems, and defense technologies. The leverage is not obvious on the surface, but it compounds beneath it. Hitchhiker metals is more than a clever phrase. It describes a structural advantage built into the physics and chemistry of industrial systems. Section 6. The demand convergence. Why the future runs on metals. The timing of this pivot matters. Multiple global transformations are converging on the same constraint, material intensity. Artificial intelligence is not weightless. Data centers require massive grid upgrades, cooling systems, and conductive materials. The green energy transition hinges on copper, silver, lithium, nickel, and rare earth elements. Battery technology is fundamentally a metallurgical problem. Nuclear energy depends on specialized steels, alloys, and fuel processing. Modern defense systems, from precision munitions to aerospace platforms, are irreducibly metal dependent. Even the pace of nuclear deployment reflects this reality. China has moved aggressively to expand reactor capacity, while others lag, not merely due to politics, but because industrial ecosystems capable of supporting such expansion are rare. Across domains, the pattern is the same. The future is not constrained by ideas alone, but by matter. Section 7. Rearranging the world around metal sovereignty. Seen through this lens, China's actions form a coherent hierarchy of intent. Domestic savings habits are being nudged toward metals. Industrial policy reinforces processing dominance. Foreign partnerships, particularly with resource-rich nations, are structured around refining and separation. Reserve assets tilt toward physical commodities. Trade relationships increasingly funnel raw materials toward Chinese industrial nodes. The implicit message is simple. If you want the future, artificial intelligence, energy, electrification, defense, you will pass through us. China is not positioning itself merely as a supplier. It is positioning itself as the indispensable intermediary, the place where raw earth becomes usable power. Section 8. Conclusion. Metal sovereignty as the new power axis. What is emerging is not a temporary adjustment, but a rematerialization of economic strategy. In a world that spent decades believing finance and software could float free of physical constraints, China is anchoring itself in the opposite reality. By demoting property speculation, redirecting savings into precious metals, and doubling down on metallurgical mastery, China is aligning household behavior, industrial capacity, and geopolitical leverage around a single axis: control of matter. This is not a rejection of modernity. It is a recognition of its limits. And it suggests that in the next phase of global competition, sovereignty will belong less to those who price assets and more to those who control the metals beneath them.